Welcome back to Eating Upstate. Earlier, I spoke with Scott Ramsey, Executive Director of the New York Cider Association, about Cider Week New York, which runs from September 29th to October 9th. To better understand how Cider Week impacts producers here in Sullivan County, I spoke with Stuart Madany, Director of Cider Making and Marketing at Seminary Hill Cidery in Callicoon. Seminary Hill is a new cidery launched by Doug Doach, a Sullivan County native who currently lives outside of Chicago but plans to retire to Sullivan County. Seminary Hill's orchard is planted on land that has belonged to Doug's family for generations, and I asked Stuart about that as well. A pleasure to meet you.
Likewise, Aaron.
So my first question is, tell us a little bit about Seminary Hill. It's my understanding that one of the owners grew up in Sullivan County, but they currently live in Chicago, but they do plan to retire to Sullivan County. Do I have that right?
That's correct. Doug Doach, part of his growing up here, and his family goes back 5 generations. One of the 2 orchards is on land that's been in the family for generations. And then the actual site of the cidery was Doug Doach and Susan Manning purchased that more recently, but a while back. Yeah. So that's true. They both have day jobs. They live in Evanston, but they do tend to plan to retire back to Callicoon.
So what made them want to start a cidery?
That's a great question. Doug has from stories I've heard, has had it in his mind for a long, long time. But he told me that one of the reasons they wanted to do it was as sort of, just the history of the area. Obviously started off agricultural and then long ago became much more challenging with the railroads and the Erie Canal and just competing with the Midwest. And he just really wanted to do sort of a demonstration project that you could have a 21st century agricultural concern in Sullivan County that could be economically viable.
Okay, so what is your background and how did you come to make cider?
Oh, well, my background's architecture. I have a master's in architecture and I worked in AEC for decades. It was actually I lived in Central Virginia and we were doing a project there that had a few different facets to it. But one of them was that the owner asked us to do a feasibility study for a winery or a vineyard and that spread to include a orchard and cidery. And so we did that and he ended up pursuing that direction. And so most of that design, including the orchard and the production space and some of the tasting room was all landed on my desk. So I ended up just doing a lot of research about that. That was in 2009. So there weren't a lot of cideries. It's not that long ago, but it's really like night and day. There were very few. There was one licensed cidery in Virginia at the time and then another one in planning. So there weren't a lot of people you could go to as consultants to tell you what you really need there. So I was just doing a lot of real basic research about how you make cider and what was needed. And so as it progressed into building, at one point, the owner just said, all right, let's build it out. He'd already planned the orchard and said, just find us somebody to run it. And the gentleman I was working for in the architecture office took me aside and said, what do you say we run it? And I said, what? I hadn't considered that for a second, but then I just sat with it for a while and for some reason it just felt right. And so that's how I backed into it, really.
So what drew you to New York and its cider industry?
Well, there's a few things. Like New York and Virginia, in my opinion, are 2 of the best areas for cider. They both have pretty strongly developed tasting room and cider culture and just have highly flavored apples and a lot of really high quality cideries in them, particularly the kind of cider that I make and am most interested in, which is harvest driven, orchard based cider, sort of equivalent to fine wine, growing cider varieties, growing and utilizing cider varieties, growing them in a way that maximizes their flavor and expresses the terroir of where they're grown. So that was the fact that it was in New York was part of it. And then, really, I was looking to return to architecture, but then I stumbled upon an ad for the cider maker here. And first I was drawn by the kind of cider they wanted to make, by the fact that they were growing organically, and by the fact that they were building the world's first passive house certified cidery. Sustainable design was always my interest in architecture. And so it was just all three things that, plus being in New York. So those were all things that really appealed to me. And so I just felt like, wow, I thought I was leaving cider, but this is just sort of, checking all my boxes. So I wrote Doug an email.
Okay. So when did Seminary Hill launch, and how many cases did Seminary Hill produce last year?
So we started, there was a little bit of cider made before I started, but the building got to where we could get inside of it in late November of 2020. So that's when we really started producing here a little more. And last year in the 2019, so that was the 2019 vintage, and we made about 1,100 cases of 750 milliliter bottles. And then what we're packaging right now, the 2020 vintage, that's going to be about 2,000 cases.
Okay, so what does an event like New York Cider Week do for Seminary Hill?
Well, it, obviously just helps give people who are interested in cider but may not be familiar with us just a chance to say, okay, Cider Week's going on. There's a calendar I can check and find out what's going on. And so it makes it easier for them to investigate and connect with cideries. So, and it also just kind of raises the general awareness of cider. So those are both great things for us.
Okay, so my final question is, what are your plans for the future of Seminary Hill as far as cider production is concerned?
Well, we're definitely going to grow it. This year, we're going to make about 2,000 cases again. And the plan right now is to grow make about 3,000 cases the following year. And then we'll have to, reassess and see what the market. We're self-distributing in the area, the nearby area. So we're going to continue to grow that. We're available online, and we have a couple of cider clubs that people can subscribe to. So all that we hope to grow. Yeah, we're going to grow the product, offering some too. I've got 2 dessert ciders in the works right now. So that'll be new this year. The whole process of developing the expression of terroir is a big part of where we're going. We're finding out what apple varieties do really well here, both grow really well and produce really great flavored cider here. So right now we have a lot of varieties planted. We have 54 varieties of apple and 7 of Perry pears, Perry being the pear equivalent of cider. And as we discover the ones that really are suited to our location, we will we'll top work over trees that are less suited here to the varieties that are more suited here. And so that is a process that will really take place over the next few years. And so that'll really alter, our blends and really kind of help us settle into our terroir here. So that's a really exciting part of it.
Seminary Hill Cidery is located at 43 Wagner Lane in Callicoon. I'm Erin Shear. Eating Upstate is a production of WJFF Radio Catskill.
And we'll take a short break and come back with Pride Time. You're listening to Radio Chatskill.